Picture this: a family with money, land, and secrets so dark, they stayed buried for years. Until one summer night, a burn pile in the Georgia woods revealed a gruesome truth. This is the story of how anger, lies, and a $2 million insurance policy tore the Farris family apart. Strap in. It's about to get wild. The Farris family of Alpharetta, Georgia, seemed to have it all: money, land, and a picture-perfect farm on a wide stretch of acreage. Yet beneath that polished life, they struggled with constant arguments and resentments. In July 2018, a shocking discovery on their property cast a glaring light on those hidden troubles. Gary Farris, the 58-year-old father and a successful attorney, was found lifeless, his remains placed on a burn pile in the woods. Right away, this tragedy exposed a complex web of secrets. Gary was known for being generous, yet family members claimed he was also strict about money. His wife Melody had her own stories, some involving alleged affairs. Their children, now adults, had differing accounts of what had been simmering for years. Each relative held strong opinions on who was responsible for Gary's final moments, pointing fingers in all directions. In the following weeks and months, local authorities pieced together a puzzle. How could a respected family man, living on a peaceful stretch of farmland, end up lost among the ashes with no clear explanation? The investigation took more than 6 years to reach its conclusion, and when it did, a single person stood accused of ending Gary's life. Was it greed, revenge, or something else that caused such a horrific act? Over time, as small details emerged, the family's private tensions burst into public view. We will walk through each step of this case, from the moment Gary's son first spotted something bizarre in the burn pile to the day a verdict was finally handed down in court. As we go, we'll see how old grudges, broken trust, and money struggles built up until everything collapsed. We'll also see how investigators sifted through tales of hidden weapons, strange phone calls, and shifting alibis. Some of what you hear may stretch belief, but every twist led to one harsh truth. Though none of us condone wrongdoing, it's important to understand how simple disagreements can become tragedies when left to fester. We invite you to reflect on each event in this story and consider how intervention or open conversation might have changed the outcome. Keep your mind open as we explore the hidden layers of a family whose heartbreak became a cautionary tale. Before we look deeper, we have a quick favor to ask. Please drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers around the globe. In the end, this case may leave you with new questions about loyalty and the dangers of letting secrets grow. But first, let's set the stage with the bigger story of the Farris family and the events that led to that fateful day in July 2018. Gary Farris was a well-known attorney in the Atlanta area. He focused on commercial real estate, earning both professional respect and a comfortable income that helped him provide for those around him. He and his wife Melody built their life on a 10-acre farm in Cherokee County, sometimes referred to as Alpharetta due to the local mailing address. They kept horses, goats, and chickens, presenting an image of rural bliss that friends and neighbors admired. Below the surface, though, the marriage was deteriorating. The couple had been together for nearly 4 decades, and their house was divided, both literally and emotionally. Melody stayed in the master bedroom upstairs, while Gary lived in the basement, which had its own sleeping area and office. This arrangement allowed them to coexist without facing their growing issues directly. Money disputes often sparked clashes, especially once Melody's previous extramarital relationship came to light. Although Gary had tried to reconcile after her first affair years earlier, tensions never fully subsided. Sources close to the family remembered Gary as a generous soul who regularly helped relatives. Yet that same generosity seemed to fuel some of his frustrations. Arguments about large expenses and family spending would flare up regularly. As the couple's children reached adulthood, a few relied on Gary's support far more than others. Allegations of stolen funds, questionable purchases, and general irresponsibility created rifts that festered over time. 2 of their sons, Scott and Chris, were each accused by Melody of taking advantage of Gary's goodwill. Meanwhile, Gary believed that Melody's personal habits, particularly any unapproved use of credit, strained their financial situation. Despite these cracks, nobody outside the family guessed that underlying hostility was approaching a point of no return. Gary's busy work schedule often kept him away, while Melody leaned on certain relatives or companions for emotional support. One such companion was Roy Rusty Barton, a man connected to Melody's extended family. Whether or not Melody truly intended to leave her marriage for Rusty, their closeness reportedly troubled Gary, adding to his suspicions that something was very wrong. Melody stood to benefit if anything happened to Gary, in part because of a life insurance policy worth around $2 million. While few people initially considered that a true motive for harm, the idea eventually surfaced once the situation on the farm took a tragic turn. On top of the financial angle, there was also the simple fact that the pair no longer shared the warmth they once had as a couple. Some relatives later recalled that just before everything fell apart, there was an uneasy sense of pressure building at the house. Old arguments flared up, small acts of disrespect escalated, and frustration seemed to surround them like a storm cloud. Looking back, it seems all the ingredients were there for a disastrous outcome. Yet no one would have guessed just how far these family tensions would spiral, until a shocking event forced everyone to face the dark truth. Early in July 2018, Gary seemed to vanish without a trace. His family members noticed he hadn't shown up to usual routines, and his vehicle was still parked at the farm. Worried, they decided to search the property, hoping he might have suffered a health problem or had an accident somewhere in the fields or woods. It didn't take long for Gary's son, Scott, to come upon a troubling site in a burn area used for disposing of old debris. Although he wasn't certain at first, the blackened remains appeared human. Overwhelmed, he called local authorities for help. Soon, sheriff's deputies and investigators arrived, quickly confirming that the remains were indeed Gary's. Overnight, the farm turned from a serene country home into the scene of a major inquiry. Initially, there was a small chance it might have been a freak accident. Some wondered if Gary had stumbled near the flames or collapsed unexpectedly. However, any hope of a natural explanation faded when investigators found evidence of a bullet. That single piece of information transformed the scene into something far more ominous. Realizing that Gary's life had been ended on purpose, the sheriff's team began treating the entire property as a crime scene. Inside the main house, officers carefully collected samples, checked for any signs of violence, and tried to figure out who might have had the opportunity to harm Gary. Their search revealed drops of blood in a few spots, raising questions about what really occurred before his body ended up outdoors. They also discovered items that hinted at potential cleanup efforts, though none of that fully explained how anyone could move a man of Gary's size so far without arousing suspicion. In the days following this grisly discovery, detectives interviewed each family member separately. They asked about Gary's recent routines, whether he was in good health, and when he was last seen. His wife Melody gave one account of the day Gary vanished. His children offered others. Already it was clear that the family was divided, with each member carrying their own suspicions. Some pointed fingers at Melody, citing long-running marital conflicts, while Melody implied other relatives might be involved. Meanwhile, forensics teams reviewed every detail. They noted footprints around the burn area, tested ashes for additional clues, and examined the leftover debris for any fragments of a potential weapon. They also checked Gary's phone records to learn more about his final hours. This laid the groundwork for the next phase of the investigation, verifying alibis, analyzing suspicious phone calls, and seeing who might benefit from Gary's death. Although nobody could imagine how anyone in this quiet environment would cause Gary such harm, law enforcement pressed forward. They wanted to know how the remains had been set on fire, how a bullet ended up in his body, and why no one reported him missing sooner. Within a matter of days, investigators recognized that this case was heading into a far darker realm than anyone initially suspected. Once forensic teams confirmed that Gary's life had been taken with a weapon, investigators dug deeper into the family's accounts of his final hours. They discovered a timeline puzzle. Gary's breathing device, essential for his nighttime routine, had not been used on July 3rd. This strongly suggested he never made it to bed that night. Even more curious, data from his phone placed it moving around the farm early the next morning, including near the area where his remains were found. By mid-morning on July 4th, that phone stopped transmitting altogether. Meanwhile, authorities realized there might be more to Melody's story than she initially admitted. Bank records showed a purchase of cleaning supplies made on July 4th, at a time when she had claimed to be busy at home. On top of that, Phone records indicated she made several calls to Roy Rusty Barton, a man rumored to be more than just a friend. Melody first denied having ongoing contact with anyone outside her marriage, but investigators soon established that she and Rusty spoke frequently. The timing of those calls raised eyebrows, especially when stacked against Gary's sudden disappearance. During interviews, Melody theorized that Gary might have experienced a medical emergency and fallen into the flames. However, the evidence of a bullet, along with blood traces in the house, ruled out an accident. As investigators pressed her about potential motives, Melody pointed to tension with her son, Scott, or issues involving other relatives. Yet none of her statements fully explained her own whereabouts or the strange timing of that cleaning product purchase. A major question surfaced. Who would have been able to move Gary's body, likely in the middle of the night, without anyone noticing? At over 300 pounds, Gary would have been difficult to transport alone. Investigators checked vehicles around the farm for signs of blood or cleanup. They also tested farm equipment, including a small tractor. While some stains matched Gary's DNA, there was limited evidence of a large-scale effort to relocate a person that size. Still, the inconsistent stories and suspicious activity in the barn area fueled speculation. Investigators further uncovered a revealing transaction on July 3rd close to midnight. Someone used Gary's bank card to add phone minutes to an account later linked to Melody. That single act presented a huge red flag, since Gary strictly monitored family spending, and almost certainly would have questioned such a charge. Detectives theorized that whoever initiated the purchase felt confident Gary would never discover it, suggesting they knew he was already gone. By combining these financial, digital, and forensic clues, the sheriff's office drew a clearer picture. It pointed squarely at someone who stood to benefit not only financially, but also personally from Gary's absence. Though other family members were still on their list of people to interview, Melody's version of events was rapidly losing credibility. In the eyes of authorities, she was fast becoming the prime suspect, someone with a tangled web of motives, hidden relationships, and unexplained actions that no one else could account for. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement gathered enough evidence to file official charges against Melody. Around a year after Gary lost his life, authorities secured a warrant for her arrest. She had left Georgia for Tennessee, staying near relatives. Deputies there assisted with the process, taking her into custody without incident and returning her to Georgia to face multiple counts: malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault involving a weapon, concealing a death, and giving false statements to investigators. Once news of Melody's arrest broke, people close to the family were stunned. Although Gary's children were distraught by their father's loss, many had also grown suspicious of their mother. Some relatives were torn, not wanting to believe that Melody could have caused such harm. Others found themselves recalling specific comments she had made, angry outbursts, references to her frustration, or remarks suggesting deep resentment. There were also rumors that she had mentioned wanting Gary's life insurance funds, though no one expected events to spiral this way. During pre-trial hearings, more unexpected details emerged. A family acquaintance claimed Melody often expressed how miserable her marriage had become, even accusing Gary of trying to control her finances and track every purchase she made. Investigators also questioned Roy Rusty Barton again, hoping to confirm whether Melody had spoken openly about her intentions. He initially told authorities that Melody made a chilling phone call about Gary's remains, but later attempted to explain he might have misremembered key points. Defense lawyers argued that Rusty was under pressure to say whatever the investigators wanted in order to avoid drawing suspicion himself. Meanwhile, Melody's legal team shifted attention onto her children, hinting they might have had reasons to remove Gary from the picture. They claimed at least one son was living on the property without contributing financially, piling stress onto Gary. They also insisted certain family members had stolen from Gary's accounts, leading to sharp disagreements within the household. Defense attorneys suggested these disputes could have boiled over, especially once the father became fed up with handing out money. According to court documents, Melody continued denying any role in Gary's demise. She said that although their relationship was rocky, she had never wished him direct harm. The defense leaned on the idea that Gary's size would have made it impossible for Melody, who weighed less than half of what he did, to move his body alone. They also pointed out that evidence collected near farm equipment could be explained by normal usage, not by criminal activity. Still, the prosecution leaned on statements she made regarding her late husband's finances and her pattern of hiding personal phone activity. Investigators stressed that the suspect's actions after Gary disappeared, like using his bank card and offering changing explanations, pointed toward guilt. With these contrasting arguments in place, the public braced itself for a courtroom battle. Whether or not Melody was the only person involved, she was now firmly in the hot seat, facing the most serious charges the state could bring. The trial began several years after Gary's passing, with tensions in the family still running high. Prosecutors argued that the evidence pointed directly to Melody. According to them, she had every reason to want Gary gone, ranging from financial strain to personal frustration over his rigid control of their money. They laid out phone logs, bank transactions, and expert testimony to show that everything converged on the same conclusion. She arranged events so Gary never made it to bed on July 3rd, then concealed his whereabouts to keep suspicion at bay. In the courtroom, forensic experts walked the jury through key points: digital data from Gary's phone, placing it near the burn area at daybreak, the suspicious timing of Melody's store receipts, and the fact that Gary's breathing device had sat untouched that night. They also described how the remains displayed signs of intense heat, suggesting a deliberate effort to erase evidence. Family members took the stand, each with a version of events colored by personal conflicts. Several of Gary's children offered tearful recollections, voicing memories of his generosity, but also conceding that the household was filled with heated arguments. One child insisted the couple's issues were so severe that nobody felt comfortable around them anymore. Another recalled that Melody complained regularly about her husband's health concerns, credit habits, and controlling nature. Melody's defense team shot back, painting her as a wronged spouse who felt trapped by a partner with a forceful personality. They raised doubts about whether Gary's adult sons, some of whom depended on him financially, could have played a role. By highlighting disagreements involving checks and other funds, the defense suggested that more than one person might benefit from Gary's departure. They also underscored the physical difficulties of moving Gary's body, arguing Melody was not capable of transporting him alone. Outside the courthouse, public interest in the case ballooned. Local news outlets covered every development, labeling it a sensational example of family turmoil in an affluent community. Commentators focused on how many unresolved disputes existed before Gary's final day, along with the hidden resentment simmering in the background. Yet, for all the speculation, neither side produced a definitive eyewitness or security footage proving exactly what transpired on the night Gary was last seen. Through cross-examination, the prosecutor challenged defense witnesses, questioning their motives for accusing anyone other than Melody. Meanwhile, the defense seized on Rusty Barton's shifting accounts, casting his statements as unreliable. Still, the lingering detail of that late-night bank card purchase and a life insurance policy worth millions hovered over the proceedings. The jury, faced with conflicting testimony and circumstantial proof, had to decide whether these details were strong enough to prove wrongdoing beyond doubt. As closing arguments wrapped up, emotions ran high. Observers wondered if new bombshell information might change the outcome, but the fate of Melody and justice for Gary hinged on how the jury pieced together weeks of complicated testimony and evidence. After several weeks of testimony, both sides presented their final arguments. The prosecution urged the jury to consider every sign that Melody had played a central role in ending Gary's life. Unexplained financial transactions, conflicting stories, and the suspicious way evidence seemed to point back to her. The defense countered by stating that the case was built on assumptions rather than concrete proof, insisting that other family members had equal motives and opportunities. The jury received the case and deliberated for multiple days, reviewing the most compelling testimony and exhibits. Ultimately, they agreed with the prosecution's stance. Melody was found responsible for Gary's demise. Upon hearing the verdict, she reportedly showed little emotion, standing quiet as the reality set in. For many observers, the outcome was not a total shock, given the mountain of circumstantial clues. Still, the final word left the Farris children and relatives in a somber state. Some felt relieved to have a formal resolution, while others lamented the permanent rift driven through the family. Sentencing occurred a few weeks later. Under state guidelines, a conviction of this type typically carries the harshest possible punishment. The judge handed down a life sentence, noting the deliberate nature of the act. Although Melody maintained her innocence, the court did not find any reason to lighten her penalty. The possibility of parole did exist, but only after several decades, making it improbable she would regain freedom before old age. What truly caught people off guard was Melody's address to the court just before sentencing. In a final effort to shift blame, she pointed fingers at one of her children, claiming that he was the real culprit and suggesting she had been framed. Emotions flared in the courtroom, and the prosecutor quickly objected, characterizing her statement as an unfounded attempt to dodge responsibility. The judge, unmoved by her allegations, pressed forward with the sentence. Outside the courthouse, some bystanders expressed outrage that a mother would accuse her own child in such a setting. In the aftermath, the family found itself more divided than ever. While certain children felt a burden lifted by the verdict, others struggled with the pain of losing two parents at once, one to a tragic end, the other to life behind bars. Friends of Gary remembered him as a man who had poured his time and money into people he cared about. Many believed that, despite his flaws, he never deserved the fate he met. Before leaving the courtroom, the lead prosecutor gave a brief statement to the press. They thanked law enforcement for their persistence, emphasizing that it had taken years to gather enough evidence for a conviction. Meanwhile, Melody's defense team vowed to consider any possible appeals. For now, the case was officially closed and the verdict stood. Gary's life had been unjustly taken, and Melody would spend hers confined, bearing the weight of the jury's decision. In the wake of Melody's conviction, the once scenic farm began to unravel. Without Gary's steady income, unpaid bills and legal fees piled up. Within a year, the property went into foreclosure, leaving relatives astonished at how quickly their longtime home slipped away. Neighbors who had admired the sprawling estate expressed sadness, noting that so much of Gary's hard work seemed lost. For Gary's children, the outcome brought mixed emotions. Some felt relief that one parent was finally held accountable for a heartbreaking act. Others struggled with conflicting loyalties, still uncertain about what truly transpired. Extended family members felt torn between standing by Melody or accepting the jury's verdict, creating fractures that made any sort of reunion feel out of reach. Those who knew Gary recalled how he immersed himself in work and offered help whenever he could. In the legal community, former colleagues described him as a mentor who tackled complex cases with skill and determination. They organized modest tributes in his honor, hoping to preserve the generous spirit he once displayed. Still, the painful circumstances of his final days cast a long shadow over these warm recollections. Local media outlets continued to discuss the case well after the trial, examining how tensions at home and financial disagreements could spiral into such heartbreak. Documentaries and true crime programs revisited the timeline, exploring how small, unresolved problems may eventually escalate. Some viewers felt the story underscored the need to watch for underlying rifts, whether linked to family quarrels, hidden relationships, or questionable spending habits. While serving her sentence, Melody maintained that she was unjustly accused. Even so, her attempts to overturn the verdict never led to any notable changes in her legal status. She is expected to remain in prison for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, relatives wrestled with the reality of losing both parents, Gary to a tragic end, and Melody to a verdict that took her away. That absence of closure weighed heavily on them. Reflecting on this case, many people ask whether earlier action might have halted the downward spiral. More direct conversations about finances, honest discussions about relationship troubles, or stronger interventions could possibly have changed the path this family took. Unfortunately, those questions remain unanswered, reminding us how pivotal it is to address major concerns before resentment grows. We invite you to share your thoughts on how things might have been resolved differently. What lessons can be learned from the Farris family's story? Let us know in the comments. By exchanging ideas, we might help someone else in a difficult situation seek help before it's too late. Before you go, please support our channel by giving this video a like, sharing it, and subscribing. When you engage with us, you help keep important discussions alive. Let's continue learning from these tragedies so that, together, we can work toward healthier, more open communication in every household. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to hearing your perspectives.